Okay, board, today is the time we set aside in our continuous journey toward racial and social justice to talk about our Women's Observance. We mark this on our calendars every year so that we can celebrate the fact that women have always shaped the arc of progress. Always shaped. Often without recognition or resources, right? From classrooms to boardrooms to community centers to kitchen tables, women have been the steady architects of change. We have organized communities and strengthened families, we've advanced knowledge, and we have expanded opportunities in ways that some could not dream was possible. But even as we celebrate, it is always, always important, especially for us as educators, to reflect. And we reflect on those women who broke barriers so others could walk through those doors that were closed to us. We reflect on the women who built labor institutions whose intellect fueled movements and whose courage reshaped laws and lives. We reflect on those whose names were not recorded in history, but whose impact lives on in the freedoms we exercise today, those freedoms that we understand that today we must still fight for. But our observance is not just looking back, because we have a lot of work to do. We know the times we are living in, not only here in the United States, but around the world. Women continue to face disparities in pay and representation, in safety, in access to health care, and leadership opportunities. Women, particularly women of color, women with disabilities, LGBTQ+ women, immigrant women, and women living in poverty, continue to navigate systems that are not designed with them in mind. And yet, despite these realities, women continue to lead. We have one of those women right here beside me who answered yes when I made the call to ask her to chair NEA's Women's Issues Committee. Francesca is a middle school orchestra teacher. Did you hear me talk about my grandson making the all-city band? Oh yeah. From Texas. She serves on her campus leadership team as the Fine Arts Department Chair and is a recognized mentor in her district. Her leadership extends throughout NEA, where she has held leadership roles as president of her local and leadership positions within NCUEA. Francesca believes the music room is one of the best vehicles for teaching racial and social justice. Through her leadership and her classroom, she exemplifies what it means to use education and music as a force for change. NEA Board, please welcome the chair of our Women's Issues Committee. Did you notice her hair is purple? Francesca.
Thank you so much, Madam President, and good morning, NEA Board. As you heard, my name is Francesca Mejia, and I'm a middle school orchestra teacher just outside of Austin, Texas, and I proudly serve you as your Women's Issues Committee Chair. Right now, we're in a moment where coordinated efforts are being made to reduce access to the ballot, restrict bodily autonomy, and weaken long-fought protections for women and families. Measures like the SAVE Act and broader attacks on voting access remind us that progress is never guaranteed. It must continue to be defended and expanded through organizing. And in moments like this, women must remember one of our greatest traditions of resistance and resilience, that we lift as we climb. We protect one another, amplify one another, and build collective power so that no woman is left fighting alone. We stand in the legacy of women who have showed us what that looks like. Women like Fannie Lou Hamer, who reminded this nation that democracy must include everyone, and Dolores Huerta, who taught generations that organizing is how working families claim dignity and power. Their courage reminds us that progress has always required women. Women to organize, women to lead, and women who refuse to be silent. This is not a moment of quiet concern. It is a moment for collective action, coalition building, and fearless leadership from women across this country. And few leaders embody that fight more powerfully than the president and CEO of the National Women's Law Center. Fatima Goss Graves stands as one of the nation's most influential voices for gender justice. As president and CEO of the National Women's Law Center, she leads an organization that has shaped more than 50 years of major legal and policy wins for women and girls. She also co-founded the Time's Up Legal Defense Fund, extending support and accountability in the fight to end sexual harassment and advance workplace justice. Throughout her career, Fatima has been a tireless advocate on issues that shape the daily realities of women and girls, including income security, childcare access, reproductive rights, education, equal pay, and protections from sexual violence. Her advocacy centers those most impacted by systemic inequities, especially women and girls of color, LGBTQ communities, and low-income families. Widely recognized for her effectiveness in some of the nation's most complex policy arenas, she regularly testifies before Congress and federal agencies, bringing clarity, urgency, and humanity to the issues at stake. Fatima is a relentless advocate and activist, and I am honored to add to that list the NEA's 2026 Women's Observance speaker. Team NEA, please join me in welcoming the voice and force that is Fatima Goss Graves.
Fatima, welcome to our house.
There is nothing like being in this house. That's clear.
You don't even have a clue. Let me tell you something. The power and force that these people bring, you know that the NEA is the largest labor union in this country. These are the people who are in every single community in this nation. They are the ones that are going to be hanging on your every word, no pressure. But as they advocate, as they go back home, they will be able to do it from a place of knowledge and wisdom, and I will tell you, inspiration. This woman here, board, is not only my partner. You know that we've partnered with the National Women's Law Center for a long time. But I now have the honor and privilege of serving on the board. And I can tell you from experience, the incredible work that Fatima leads is quite extraordinary. And the reason we wanted her here is because she understands that we are not just in a moment. And so everything she's doing is strategic about fighting forward in a way that we are getting rights. We're not only fighting against all of the horrific things that are happening. We just wanted to have a conversation. I'm just having a conversation with my friend. You guys are invited. So Fatima, just tell us a little bit about yourself. What brought you to the National Women's Law Center? What inspired you to pursue law as a career even? And tell us a little bit more about what the Law Center does.
Well, before I do that, I really do just need to say it is a giant honor to be with all of you all. And you all are holding and guiding young people in particular in communities around this country in unprecedented times. So I just want to say, I kind of feel like I see what's on your shoulders. And I want to name it and say, and just thank you as a first step. Okay, why don't I tell you a little bit about my story. I'm actually the first lawyer in my family, but I knew kind of from a younger age that is what I wanted to do, in part because I grew up hearing the stories of the way in which my family, both my father's family in Knoxville, Tennessee, and later learned that my mother's family in Detroit, Michigan, their families were plaintiffs in school desegregation cases. So it was Goss versus Board of Education in Knoxville, Tennessee, and my dad and his siblings were the plaintiffs. And in Detroit, it was the younger siblings of my mother. And partly they came from really big families, so you look for that, so you keep having standing. And there were 7 of them in my dad's family, so you knew across 20 years. So they figured there would always be somebody who needed to go to school. But in part, the reason they were able to do that in Tennessee at the time was that my grandfather owned a barbershop on the black side of town. And they figured the risks that they would take would be different from someone who had the risk of losing their job. Lots of risks. And I say that because we're in a time where the call for everyone in this country is to be courageous. And so I lean on those founding stories around what it looked like to be courageous at a time where our laws were far less secure than they are today, even as fragile as they seem, right? So I wanted to be on the other side of that. I thought about the law as a force for good. So I'm telling you right now, to be flipped upside down on so many fundamental things, whether it is in education or something else, it can be hard to hold on to that. But that's why I went to law school. And I leaped at the chance to join the National Women's Law Center. And maybe I would have taken any job, really, like if they were doing anything. But I was lucky enough that my first job there, and I've had a lot of jobs there, was to work on education policy. And so I came up thinking about the work of Title IX, the work of Title VI, and how it is we work side by side with young people and educators to ensure that they can have access to the most formative times in their lives. And so that grounding work always stays with me. I always tell our education team that they're like secretly my favorite team. They can't tell anyone else, and it is because of that grounding work.
So, as we're living through the reality, the folks in this room haven't been, a few of them have been on the earth as long as I have been. There are a few, but most of them, they're young, they're youngins. As they are grappling with this reality, just like you said, it's kind of turned things upside down for you in ways that, freedoms are always fragile. That's a reality of a democracy, and we're still a young democracy, still at the work. But as we are living at this time where the overt attacks on education and on gender justice, on language and freedoms writ large. What are you seeing different about your work?
Yeah, at the top of last year, at the National Women's Law Center, we put out a sort of guide around what we thought we would see come from the administration and beyond, what we thought the areas of focus were. And when I look back at that report,
How'd that turn out?
so we were right around the areas of focus. There are some areas that I think that we didn't understand fully, and I think we all need to be candid around that. Like, for example, we were right around the fact that, like most authoritarian regimes around the world, that they would pick some consistent scapegoats and use them again and again. So in our country, they've really picked immigrants, they've picked trans folks, and they've picked vague notions of DEI, and they believe that those three things, if they say those three things, they give them permission to do pretty much whatever they want. And they're betting that people will be willing to trade off their freedoms because they have been convinced that something better will happen on the other side. So we understood that those three big buckets were going to be the out loud dangerous permission structure. Here's some things that I didn't predict, and I like to be candid. I didn't understand how DOGE would escalate not just the pace, but the level of lawlessness, so that things were so broken, and even when we got courts to say, no, that was totally illegal, it's hard to put back together again, right? Or how fear and retribution would lead wide swaths of civil society, of educational institutions, of companies, of law firms to comply with things they know weren't illegal. That never occurred to me, in part, I will tell you, because as someone who sometimes sues schools, who sometimes sues companies, I thought they understood the power they had. That's how they often would act. So to see compliance in advance in the way we saw, I know that that's what happened around the globe. I just didn't think it would happen here. So that's another area where I would say I was wrong. All right. Last area where I will tell you our predictions weren't exactly as we thought. We knew that there would be attacks on reproductive freedom, attacks against abortion care, emergency abortion care, mifepristone, attacks against contraception, and beyond. We did not expect that they would be so quiet about it, that it would be quiet as a mouse about everything that was happening on reproductive freedom, where it was really hard to help people understand what was happening. And that there would be a louder story, one that is growing and growing, from what is called the pronatalist movement, that is out of the edges of the extreme and inside the White House. And I didn't expect that. And the reason is because they were so shunned and considered extreme. This is the sort of set of folks that have a strong belief that there is a moral duty to produce as many children as possible, either from the tech framework. These are the folks that believe they individually have a moral duty because they need to populate with their genius. That's like the Elon Musk view of the world. Or from some that are more traditionally that their religion guides them. But they believe very strongly that what's getting in the way of that is women working, women accessing childcare, women accessing reproductive health care. And so all of that has come together in a way, some things how we expected, and it's allowed for laws to be seemingly flipped on their head in terms of how they're enforced. It's allowed for institutions to run scared, and it's allowed for agencies to be on the other side of their missions. And we're just getting started.
So this group of educators, activists, and unions understand what you just said. It's not that we weren't preparing for, but the speed, the consolidation of power, all the things that you just described. And so what we have been wrestling with at every level, you know, we have levels of affiliates, local, state, and national. At every level is, okay, so given what we know now, what strategies do we need to change? We're not changing our mission, right? But talk to us a little bit about how you change your strategies at the Law Center to address what you just said.
Yeah, I think we've had to hone our strategies significantly because we can't be everywhere, we can't do everything, right? And we also have a glimpse of who's doing what, right? So if this is covered really well, should we focus over here? So that is some of what we're doing. But back to those three big scapegoats. We think those scapegoats have to be answered. We think that rather than the idea of running from a fight around trans liberation and freedom, or running from a fight around diversity, equity, and inclusion, or running from a fight around protecting immigrants, that those scapegoat areas, we have to be in constant contention around what this country is really going to stand for. And if we take ourselves back in a time machine to a year ago this time, there were a lot of people who were saying we should not. That those areas were pulling people down, and maybe the only solution is to focus and talk about the price of eggs as the only focus. Missing this bigger effort to undermine our entire democracy and take away all of our freedoms. So we decided that we would litigate more in those areas. We've been filing suits challenging their DEI executive order. I'm so grateful for you all for jumping in that fight too. And strategy-wise, what I realized, again, and this is why it's so important that you all have been a part of this conversation, and AFT and student organizers, is that educational institutions were afraid. So what does it look like for those who are most deeply impacted, for the students, for the educators, for the families in those communities, to be the ones fighting for the institutions when the institutions won't fight for themselves? So that is a litigating strategy, and it's requiring us to be creative around who are the right people who could actually bring those suits. But it is also an organizing strategy of bringing together people who may be unusually aligned. They may not always sit together at the table. We've been having conversations with folks we've fought with for years around Title IX. Years. Turns out we have a lot in common today around the future of education, and we're willing to sit together in different ways. And so that is a thing that we're doing more. And then the last thing in terms of where we're spending our time, we're realizing is we have a duty to narrate for people what is happening in a way they can absorb, and that doesn't leave folks feeling totally hopeless, right? So how do I explain to people about the pronatalist drive, because I think people need to know about it, in a way that doesn't make them want to just get into bed, put the covers over their head, and never return? That is difficult, right? And so we don't put anything out there without either a way for people to get engaged, a way for them to be a part of a bigger community, or a way for them to see themselves as a part of this fight for our future together. And I think sometimes in our work, we're very good at saying all the things that are wrong, rather than naming how much is possible and how many courageous people are ready to be by your side and fighting alongside you.
Thank you, yes. And it's hard, but necessary. We always have to have in front of us that vision of what we want it to be. We know that this democracy was imperfect before this. That's an understatement. And so it's never realized its promise, of course. But in times like this, you get into that fight mode, and then you're just fighting for what you've already won instead of fighting for where you need to go. So that's always a reminder for us as educators. I'd like you to talk a little bit more about how all of this particularly impacts women and girls in ways that we know they usually are disproportionately impacted.
Well, there's a bunch of things. Again, some of it we predicted, some of it we didn't predict in exactly this way that we're grappling with right now. For example, we're representing domestic violence and sexual assault coalitions around the country whose funds for under the Violence Against Women Act and under other programs were halted. Halted in the name of what the administration calls illegal DEI, and halted in the name of what the administration calls gender ideology. Basically, they told rape crisis hotlines, domestic violence shelters that they had to choose. They had to choose whether they were going to serve all people who were survivors that came that way, and that they had to agree to basically never say domestic violence and sexual assault were systemic problems. Well, if you have ever worked in this area, or even if you haven't, that's just ridiculous, right? And also a First Amendment violation, right? And also what they were setting these organizations up for, who rely on federal dollars anywhere between 60 and 90% of their budgets, right? This movement is largely resourced, I think appropriately so, through federal money. Mm-hmm. I think if you ask where should federal money go, people would say yes, ending domestic violence and sexual violence is a good place for our federal money to go. But they were setting these organizations up to choose between serving survivors and potentially subjecting yourself to DOJ investigations, or taking these terrible deals. And we were able to sue, and they backed down. And when I tell you, this is why I think about every single day what it looks like to do courageous things. Those individuals and organizations who raise their hand to be willing to be the named plaintiffs, the face of this litigation, they knew they were accepting a lot of risk. But because of them, it opened the door to at least stabilize the sector for this year. But we're gonna have to keep fighting. We're gonna have to keep fighting for the child care providers around the country whose funds were intermittently frozen through either Head Start cuts or child care blocks over the course of the year. It's not an accident that they've been going after child care. Remember I talked to you about the pronatalists? It's not an accident. It's not like they stumbled into it. And child care, which is giantly bipartisan. If you ask people, do you think people should have access to child care? Across political party, across gender, people say yes. People say yes. The business community is begging for more child care in their communities. But what is happening right now is we're in contention for whether or not that will be true in the future. And what we have been hearing across the country is providers that operate on a shoestring budget. Some may be your members, but operate on a shoestring budget, no matter how they're funded. They're not sitting on a safety net just in case the federal government turns off their funds. If you turn off the funds, their doors close. And people have been opening and closing doors across this year in ways that are wild for not only their workforce, but for entire workforce around them, because the connection between women's ability to work and childcare is just so clear, right? I'll give you one more example, and that is, you know, the attacks on reproductive freedom that we are facing. Remember, I said they're like quiet as a mouse. We're having to tell the story, and we talk to reporters, they're like, I never heard that. I didn't know that they had turned off abortion care at the VA. I didn't know that they are putting mifepristone under review and telling us that they'll tell us what they're going to do by the end of the year, conveniently after the election, right? And so all of that is happening at the same time states are escalating. They are escalating their attacks on abortion funds. They are escalating their attacks on providers. We run a fund where we provide support for patients and helpers who have found themselves in legal jeopardy. And when I tell you the range of types of needs we have from all over the country, from people whose lives have been upended quietly, not visible to people, it's heartbreaking. Story after story of people who have not been able to get the care that they need, and then found themselves struggling with legal jeopardy. And we've heard from teachers who have done a kindness in helping their students, have provided information to their students, and then have found themselves in legal jeopardy. We've heard from social workers who have provided safe and supported resources, accurate information about what young people should do, found themselves in legal jeopardy. And so there is a quiet storm brewing of people who are being threatened, and getting us to see how we support them too is also a part of our work. Can I say one more thing? I know they said that was the last thing, but the one more thing I want to name, because I was just looking at data when we came in. One of the things we do is we track the jobs data. And at the end of the year, we were able to say something about the data that is really frightening and actually should be the clarion call that no one misses. It's that in an economy that, you know, in any given month it adds jobs or maybe it loses jobs, and it's hard to tell what's happening. But we've been tracking what that has looked like all year, and we're able to unfortunately tell the story of the unemployment rate for Black women in particular going up above 7% by the end of the year. Just to give you a comparison, in the height of the pandemic, when we were giantly nervous about what was happening with the labor force participation of all women, white women's unemployment didn't get to the level that Black women's unemployment is today. So I just want to give you that picture that even in the many months where jobs were added, they were not added evenly. And so one of the things that we're trying to get underneath is why. I mean, some of the story we know that Black women are overrepresented as federal workers, and some of the agencies where they were even more represented were the ones that were especially targeted in the cuts that happened last year. They're overrepresented in Department of Education. We know what happened to the Department of Education, for example. But there's something else going on, too, in the private sector workforce. And the thing we really want to understand is the way in which the anti-diversity, equity, and inclusion rhetoric is playing out in the day-to-day experiences of Black workers, and Black women in particular.
Wow, I know. So thank you for reminding some of us and for those who didn't know what you just shared, letting us know even more what's at stake. So you are sitting in front of folks who are teachers and education support professionals. We have retired members who understand that their work is not done in education yet. We have aspiring educators, so are young folk in leading the movement. Those college students who are studying to become teachers. As you think about that diversity in terms of who we at the NEA represent and who are part of our movement, what advice do you have for us as those educators and as unionists, given where we are in our country now and where we need to be going?
Well, that range of diversity, what a source of power that you all have. I mean, not a lot of institutions can say that. And so I hope you are leaning into that. I hope you are leaning into those who have stories and reminders and very direct experiences of peak moments in our history where we have fought and won, and when we have fought and lost, and what that looked like. Like, I think that storytelling is critical, and we need to keep alive. I keep going back to our founders, our founding board members, our founding, our co-founders of the organization to remind me of some of those battles that we had. But I also think the fact that you have such a diversity, including young people who are organizing in ways that are different, who are digital natives, who are in some ways futurists because they haven't accepted yet the idea that things have to be a particular way. What a gift to have that under the same roof as those who've gone down the path and won and lost over and over and over. So my one big point of advice is to lean into your strengths. But then the second is you all are in every community. And it can be really hard to understand quickly what is happening on the ground. You know, I understand you had the Minnesota delegation here this morning, and they have been inspiring all of us in their activism. And what works in Minnesota will be similar to, but not the same as what works in Nebraska and what works in New Jersey and what works in Ohio and, right? So how do you leverage the power of having folks in your tent and next to the tent who can give you real-time updates about what has been working and where you are confronting obstacles to keep building along the way? I mean, I don't know about you, Becky, but I don't remember a time where we have had to, with this pace, keep honing and refining and shifting our strategy. We go one direction, they adjust, so we have to adjust too. And that only happens well if you keep learning from each other, and you have that inside the house. I mean, that is a level of power that not everyone has. And then, you know, at the Law Center, we always say that our work calls us to center those who are most under threat, and then we can sort of go from there. So it is why we are vocal and clear and unapologetic leaders in the work to combat the violence and erasure against trans folks, because we see the threat, and we know that a threat in one place never stays there, and that it is always going to be connected to everyone's freedom. And so I am curious for you all what that looks like. Like, what does it look like to spot the fact that, listen, educators generally are under assault right now. We've been able to work with you on the book bans. We've been able to work with you on the sort of specific attacks. There are some pieces that are more under threat. So what does it look like to hone in on, you know, what is at the very tip as a way to protect not only those who are most under threat, but also understanding that it protects all of us.
And it is always about all of us, right? And we understand in this room that our diversity is our strength. We need to remind our country that our diversity is our strength. And part of what we know and we understand is that we can't do this alone. We can't do it alone. And the importance of our partnership with the Law Center cannot possibly be understated. Because as you are on the front lines, and let me tell you something, board members, this courageous woman, do you think the things that she just shared with you, that she is not under attack every single day? Oh, you better believe it. And the Law Center is under attack. She talked about everybody is under attack. So I want you to understand the importance of a partnership like this in the work that we do together. I need you to give it up again for my friend, our partner, Fatima Goss Graves, for joining us today and advocating for us always, always, always. Okay, stop. I need you to give her a union clap. Come on.